Hey, world history students. Today I am going to run through the last final section of our Cold War notes, part 4. This one is the shortest one, so I'm going to kind of try to keep it short and sweet. But it is going to be a really important one because I am going to tell you the summative reflection question that you will have next week when we wrap up the Cold War, which is how cold was the Cold War really? So kind of keep that in mind as we go through the slideshow. You see here the note sheet is linked in. There's also a Loom video lecture that I'm giving right now that'll be linked in there. So everything is also always found on Schoology, but reach out if you have questions. Let's go for it. Okay, we have two essential questions. One, what is the difference between a hot war and a cold war? And then two, what is a proxy war? Okay, so in order to think about what proxy wars are, we need to define what the third world means. Okay, so you might have heard people refer to the third world or the first world before. A pretty popular meme in the last couple years was first world problems. You might have seen that before, you might have used that before. Did you know where that came from, though? I'm about to tell you. So, this is actually rhetoric from the Cold War. After World War II, the world gets divided into these three worlds. And by first world, what they meant was industrialized, capitalist, democratic nations. So we've got this map on the slide here that's going to point out which countries are the first world. And this is exactly what you'd expect it to be. Countries that are a part of NATO, countries that are on Team USA during the Cold War. So you've got Canada, the United States, Western European countries. These are all capitalistic countries that have democratic styles of government. And then what doesn't really get used anymore because the Soviet Union fell is the second world. By second world, it means everything in the yellow on this map. So these are communist countries. So basically the Soviet Union, China, which we haven't talked about yet, but China also becomes a communist nation in the 1949. And then Eastern European countries, those satellites that we talked about that the Soviet Union forced to be communist nations. That's the second world. And then everything else in the world gets lumped into this third world category. Okay, so these are typically developing nations. So if we talk about development on like a scale, okay, you've got developed industrialized countries. Think of the Industrial Revolution, factories, capitalism, when you studied that unit. Every place in red, so Africa, most of Latin America, a lot of Southwest Asia, is looking towards to move towards capitalizing, to industrializing their country, and they're kind of up for grabs. They are not aligned, meaning that they haven't really they haven't picked a side. They're not Team USA and they're not Team Soviet Union in this epic battle between the two. They're oftentimes poor, politically unstable, a lot of conflicts, and a long history of colonialism and imperialism. So you're probably noticing Africa is, we talked about imperialism there, and the same with Latin America. So how European countries tried to didn't try to. European countries took resources from them, tried to put in kind of their will on them. They're dealing with that history. And so this is going to be kind of you're thinking of the Cold War as like a chess game. These are going to be like the places that they're going to be trying to win over and say, hey, come align with us. Come be on Team USA, or hey, come be on Team Soviet Union. And sometimes it's friendly like that. Hey, come join us. We'll give you incentives. Or sometimes it's, hey, we're going to invade you if you don't do what we want you to do, which we're going to see. So you need to understand those three worlds, that rhetoric or that way of talking about the world. First world being Team USA, second world being Team Communism, Soviet Union, and then the third world being the world that's up for grabs. Because a lot of the wars we're going to talk about, these proxy wars, are going to happen in the third world. Okay, so here's a video that's going to talk about how the third world is defined. I'm not going to play it for time purposes, but you are more than welcome to check it out on the slideshow. So our question, our kind of pause and reflect, why might the superpowers, the United States and Soviet Union, what might they do to win the loyalty of the third world? Okay, so thinking about if you're in a fight with your friends and you're trying to get the kind of neutral people on your team, what are you going to do to persuade them to come over to your side? So things like spreading lies about the other, talking yourself up, being like, this is why I'm so great. I'm going to show you why it's so great. So kind of those things like convincing the third world that your team is the better team, the stronger team, the winning team. And then where we're going to go with this is that countries that are kind of like, we don't really want to pick a side, sometimes they're going to end up at war. Or if they do pick a side and the other team thinks it's the wrong choice and it's a valuable place, they are going to invade. And we're going to see that with Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Okay, next up, another really important thing. In order to say how cold was the Cold War, we need to know what those terms mean. Cold War versus hot war. So a Cold War, got the definition on the slide, struggle over political differences carried on by means short of military action or war. Okay, so when you hear the word cold, think of like it's not hot fighting. Okay, hot means weapons are being used. There's actual physical fighting. It's all action. Okay, versus Cold War, it's going to be no actual action. It's just rhetoric talking, no physical fighting, just kind of like political. So think about maybe a conflict you've had with a sibling. Okay, if, for example, you steal your sibling's t-shirt in high school, and even though she's younger than you, she pins you up against the wall and punches you in the stomach and takes the shirt off of you. Didn't happen to me, happened to a friend. That would be like a hot war. My husband's laughing at me. That's a hot war because there's actual fighting there. Someone got punched in the stomach. Okay, a Cold War would be rhetoric, talking, like threatening me. Like, I am going to go tell mom that you took my shirt and you could potentially get grounded for doing that. Okay, she is still trying to get that t-shirt back from me, but she's using like manipulation and talking. So that would be an example of like a cold conflict. Okay, but then think on the big scale. So the Cold War gets titled Cold War because from World War II, the end of World War II, up until the Soviet Union falls in 1991, the Soviet Union and the United States never actually go to war with each other. You never see a Soviet soldier fighting a US soldier on the battlefield. Unlike World War II, where you saw actual physical fighting, World War I, war in the trenches, those were hot wars. Cold War, you don't actually see any soldiers fighting US versus Soviet Union. So it gets titled the Cold War. So you might be thinking, well, the answer to that essential question then, how cold was the Cold War? Miss Melms just told me it's called the Cold War. It must have been freezing cold. Well, I'm going to argue to you that the Cold War actually wasn't that cold because there were conflicts. They were just like sneakier conflicts where the United States did fight hot wars fighting the Soviet Union through other countries. And on the flip side, the Soviet Union does fight actual hot wars in order to stop the spread of democracy. And even though they don't fight each other, they do fight each other's ideologies because they're fearful of the spread of them. So let's dive in and kind of look at that a little bit closer. So this is where we get our second essential question. What is a proxy war? So a proxy war is when two countries, such as the Soviet Union and United States, they avoid direct war, but instead either fight wars or support wars that serve their interests. Okay, so I've got a list of some proxy wars that took place during the Greater Cold War that are going to prove that the Cold War wasn't actually so cold. Okay, so I'm going to talk more about these next week. We're going to go through and look at specifically, I haven't decided yet how many places we're going to look at, but I'll definitely talk to you guys about Korea and Vietnam, maybe China, maybe Cuba. But basically what's going to happen is the Cold War isn't as cold as we think because there is fighting that's going to happen. The United States fought a war in Korea. Why were we in Korea? Because we were trying to stop the spread of communism. Same thing in Vietnam. The United States fights the Vietnam War. Why are we in Vietnam? To stop the spread of communism. So while we don't actually fight Soviet soldiers during the Cold War, we do fight wars where Americans die in order to stop the spread of their ideology. And then on the flip side, the Soviet Union is going to do the same. In Afghanistan, which let me show you, is in the Middle East here. Okay, right there Afghanistan is going to be the Soviets' Vietnam. So basically, Afghanistan, the Soviets see democracy is going there, and the Soviets are like, oh no, democracy bad. We want communism there, so they're going to invade Afghanistan in order to keep communism there. They're ultimately going to lose. It's ultimately going to have some deep lasting consequences, like the United States currently being at war in Afghanistan for almost 20 years because of these Cold War conflicts. So these have some deep and lasting consequences today that really still matter. But so how cold was the Cold War? Next week or maybe the week after, I have to kind of look at it and decide how it's going to play out. But your summative for this unit is going to be to write a short little answer where you say how cold was the Cold War. And you're going to use an example of the Cold War either heating up or actually being hot in a proxy war. So think about the Cold War as this kind of thermometer that I have here. So as we looked through these notes, things like the Berlin airlift, you could think of like that being like the Cold War starting to simmer. It's like starting to start because the Soviet Union is blocking the United States supplies to Berlin. And it could have resulted in war. It didn't, but it was kind of this tension heating up. So you could use examples like that, or like the threat of nuclear weapons. It didn't actually end in hot physical fighting, but tensions are rising, that thermometer is going up. So it wasn't really that cold, it's getting hotter and hotter. And then next week, I'm going to talk to you about actual hot physical fighting in Vietnam and Korea and maybe a couple other places if we have time. Okay, so be thinking about this kind of essential question is the backdrop of what we're talking about the Cold War. So this whole lecture we talked about this epic battle between the United States and the Soviet Union, tensions increasing, things are starting to heat up. And so now by this point, hopefully you're kind of realizing that term Cold War, if you hear someone refer to that, you know that it's kind of a misname. It's not a really accurate name for the conflict because yes, there wasn't fighting between the United States and Soviet Union, but it's not like there was total peace during this time. A lot of words being fought, but also a lot of military tension too, like the Berlin airlift and the arms race, and like we're gonna see some proxy wars. So there we go. Here's a couple videos that I really like. They're long, so I'm not going to play them, but if you're looking for more information, like I've said before, Cold War is one of my favorite topics. I think it's super interesting and it matters a lot today. A lot of our conflicts come from that, so check out these videos if you're looking for more information. Otherwise, feel free to reach out and talk to us. So that is it for this fourth and final part of the lecture. Next week I'll take you through some proxy wars and let's end this Cold War and see how and why the Soviet Union falls. Okay, why does the United States come out victorious in this decades-long battle? All right, talk to you later. Peace out.